you in 2026. Welcome back to Baddest Chaplain. I'm so excited to be able to present to you our first guest of 2026, my brother, Dr. Okey Enyia. He's a nationally recognized health policy expert. He's a government affairs strategist, and also the founder of Enya Strategies, which is a mission-driven consulting firm that's dedicated to advancing health equity, shaping public policy, and driving systemic changes. You can follow him both on Substack and also at his website, enyastrategies.com. Brother Dr. Enya, thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I am really excited about this new year, about having this opportunity to set the precedent for your podcast for the year. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Likewise. I think it's an important conversation. It's an evergreen conversation, but particularly as we're recording this in January, cold and flu season is at an
Hmm.
all-time high, and you're doing health policy work. You've described yourself as someone who's done this journey from the south side of Chicago to the capital of the nation, DC, and understanding that your work not only is it evergreen, but it's also indisputable. Talk to us about that specific pivot point where you realized that what was going on in your community, what was going on in your world, and it was not just a personal struggle, but was actually preparation for this role of public service.
Yeah, great question. I think for me, it fundamentally started with my upbringing and the values and the culture that my parents instilled in me in terms of having a passion for service
Hmm.
and an interest in science.
Hmm.
And so, I can recall when I was very young, when my mom was training to be a nurse,
Hmm.
I recalled actually flipping through all of her thick textbooks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, what is this? All this. But that really sparked my interest in going into the science field. Yes, in addition to actually seeing my mom work in the healthcare field,
Hmm.
that also exposed me to a career path that went from seeing patients as a medical student to to to, to then getting into public health
Hmm.
and then working in health policy. And so um, to to fast track the the pivot point for me, I think it came um, in med school,
Hmm.
where I was shadowing physicians,
Hmm.
um, and I was one of a few black men in my class.
Hmm.
And most of the patients where I was, they didn't look like me.
Right.
And so, but the ones that did look like me, I recall seeing how they were treated differently and
Hmm.
talked to differently
Hmm.
than white patients.
Right.
And that, and I had already had this interest, this passion in giving back and in science and medicine, etc. And also equity
Right.
but it lands differently when you are seeing it and experiencing it in real time,
Hmm.
where a lot of what you have read about in terms of structural racism and the
Right.
ways in which patients of color are treated differently and talked to differently,
Hmm.
it became real as I navigated the healthcare delivery system as a medical student.
Yeah.
And so even as I was getting into med school, I knew that my vision was bigger than seeing patients as a physician. It
Hmm.
became much broader than that. And that experience in med school really galvanized and made clear that, okay, I need to figure out why things are the way they are.
Yeah.
And as I grew and evolved, and I discovered that um, in the context of policy,
Hmm.
if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Woo.
Yeah,
For real.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so, it's been this drive to put voice and language to the challenges as well as the assets of being a conscious Black person navigating spaces where I typically will be one of a few in the room. And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
I have an entire story behind it, but I will plug my book,
Of
my
course, please,
first book,
please.
which actually goes into great detail about my story. Like this book, it starts off, to your point, like, uh, childhood, high school, college, grad school, med school, Capitol Hill, and then into my doctoral program. And this really goes into great detail about my own journey in terms of what laid the groundwork for what I'm doing right now.
Yeah,
And in, in, you know, we can certainly talk about my second book at some point, but
for sure.
I guess we can just kind of pause there.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is so powerful because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand what is happening to them,
Right.
right? When it comes to health. And so people just sort of either assume that's the way it is or
Hmm.
just cynicism. I often find myself saying from the pulpit that it's very dire when we make cynicism fashionable, when cynicism becomes realism. And I
Wow.
think that when you have this such the situation that you're describing where if you're not helping to shape policy, you're on the menu.
Hmm.
This is what allows people to just sort of become numb to the crisis that we're in. Now,
Right.
and I want to lift up the work that you've done with the John Henry Health
Hmm.
Equity Playbook, because there you outline a 4-year policy agenda that's based not only on health, but economic stability and civic
Hmm.
engagement. So I'd love for you to talk about the difficulty in solving the health crisis, particularly for Black men, and
Yeah.
particularly if we're looking at Black men only through the lens of clinical medicine.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So here is the second book, so people can see it. Um, so the context behind this book, and I'll try to answer your question succinctly.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a phrase in the literature or in the public discourse now that's called the social drivers of health.
Hmm.
Um, what these social drivers of health are conditions that actually have been found to shape health outcomes more than
Hmm.
actually going to see a doctor in the clinic.
Yeah,
So, for example, housing, um, food insecurity, transportation, education,
yeah.
employment, um, other issue areas, right? And so, if 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 those conditions um, are lacking or are not being accounted for in meaningful ways, then uh, they shape health outcomes. And so, for example, if it takes an hour and a half to get to a doctor's office,
Hmm.
that is a serious access issue.
Right.
Um, if the the broad umbrella of access to care, part of what that looks like is actually the ease by which one can actually be seen by a healthcare provider.
Hmm.
But if you are unemployed or underemployed and don't have insurance,
Right.
then you're not able, or you're less likely to be able to afford to go to a doctor to be seen. So
Hmm.
that's one piece of it. Um, if you are challenged with having insurance
Hmm.
coverage, add add to that whether you have a car or
Come
if it
on.
takes you 3 or 4 bus stops to get to the doctor's office,
Hmm.
right? So it's always this layered, compounding these factors
Hmm.
that impact the extent to which you can have the agency or feel comfortable or have the ability to be seen in a timely fashion
Right.
by a culturally sensitive, culturally humble
Yeah.
healthcare provider, which is a whole nother conversation, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm. So to answer your question, um, it's been found that 80% um, of the health outcomes are shaped by factors outside of the actual clinical encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I mentioned, like the where you um, are born,
Right.
live, work, worship,
Mm-hmm.
play, again, housing, education, income, employment, all of those factors, those social factors
Yeah. Yeah.
are what shape health outcomes. And so that framework actually is what I use to ground the John Henry Health Equity Playbook. And then
Mm-hmm.
in terms of Black men, you know, um, noting my own experiences as a conscious Black male navigating
Right.
different ecosystems, different systems, having been on both sides of the table
Mm-hmm.
as an advocate, as a patient, as a staffer, as an employee. Um, you know, let's give you some stats. So Black men have the shortest life expectancy than almost any other racial group in the United States, aside from American Indians,
Right.
um, uh, and slash Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
That has been a long-standing issue for decades. Um, Black men are at, typically going to be at the bottom of various types of health issues, whether that's heart disease,
Yeah.
cancer, diabetes, etc., etc. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in the context of prostate cancer,
Yeah.
uh, my dad and three of my uncles are actually prostate cancer survivors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so while I'm blessed that they survived prostate cancer, like
Sure.
what does that mean in different contexts? If like
Yes.
my dad and three of my uncles.
Right.
Now the, the data tells us that 1 in 8 men will get prostate cancer in 1 year.
Mm.
If you are a Black man,
Mm-hmm.
that shrinks to 1 in 6. So 1 out of every 6 Black men
Whoa.
on an
Yeah.
annual basis will get prostate cancer. That's what the data tells us.
Yeah.
If there is a family history of prostate cancer, it's 1 in 4
Yeah.
Black men, right? So again, so that's one stat. Um, Black male physicians make up 3% of the physician workforce.
Whoa. Okay.
Black physicians in general make up 6% of of the physician workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Black male teachers make up 1.3% of the public school teaching workforce.
Right.
Um, Black men are 6 times as likely to be incarcerated compared to white men.
Mm-hmm.
And I can run the roll. Like, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just so my point is that this book is the first of its kind to actually be very intentional about leveraging my background in governments, policy,
Mm-hmm.
politics, research, teaching as a conscious Black man,
Mm-hmm.
um, to put forth a framework that helps people shape policy at the
Mm-hmm.
local, state, and federal levels.
Right.
And I use the John Henry legend for several reasons. And
Okay.
for your audience, for context for the audience, for those who are not familiar with the John Henry legend, um, you know, um, when you know your history, you know your power. So I
Yeah.
am a big proponent. I'm a student of history,
Mm-hmm.
and I was drawn to the John Henry legend for several reasons. So the legend actually is born from some real life John Henrys.
Right.
Um, that in the Reconstruction era, the kind of so the Civil War was far from 1861 to 1865,
Uh-huh.
and after that came Reconstruction for about 12 years.
Hmm.
And it was kind of in that time frame where there was what was called a convict leasing system,
Right.
right? Meaning that um, uh, the policies that were put in place, black codes, etc., um, they made it easier for black men to be incarcerated, to be
Hmm.
criminalized.
Hmm.
And in the case of the John Henry context, um, there actually was a 19-year-old black man who was formerly who was a convict who
Hmm.
was actually released from prison um, in West Virginia to work on the railroad in Indiana,
Okay.
and so and but he was a prototype of the need for black male labor, um, and so that was one part of it. Now, legend has it that um, a strong black man named John Henry
Hmm.
uh, was pitted against a locomotive,
Right.
a steam engine. Uh, John Henry had a hammer, and he was challenged to race a train through a mountain. So John Henry had to drill through a mountain in an effort to beat the machine,
Hmm.
which is where that phrase comes from, right? So man versus machine.
Yes.
Now, uh, John Henry did beat the machine, but at the cost of his life.
Right.
And so this idea of the man versus machine, this battle, this it's a metaphor. This mountain, that mountain is a metaphor for white supremacy or structural racism or the
Uh-huh.
chronic stress, right? So it's those things that eat away at at the body, which is one key reason why, amongst a plethora of others,
Right.
why we experience as black people worse health outcomes and just and that has been for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So my goal or my purpose in kind of centering the legend was to contemporize the legend and connect it to what's happening now in the context of where we are, and then but not just that, to actually say, okay, we know how the system is set up. It wasn't set up for us as black people or black men to thrive, but here are
Hmm.
some very practical strategies and tactics that I learned working in Congress that can be used um, for for those who want to find a way to help shape policy. So that's my longer answer to your question, but
Here for it. Here for it.
hopefully it lands. Yeah.
Because I think it's so important to understand, and I appreciate you articulating it all the way going back to the black codes, because I think people have by design a selectively short memory when we think about what are the
Yes.
sort of variables in the equation, right? It's not
Yes.
convenient to think about the diets that
Yep.
black people had to endure during the period of slavery, the diets you
Hmm.
have to endure if you're in an economically depressed area that has a food desert, or you can't
Right.
find a tomato. You can find a vape, but you can't
Right.
find a tomato. You know, like
Uh-huh.
I think all of these factors that you describe, and plus having that paradox of black people being considered both lazy and somehow necessary and superhuman enough to beat
Right.
a machine. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's just like
Right.
all
Right.
of those factors. It shouldn't surprise anyone when you list out all of those health realities and outcomes when
Hmm.
you think about all of those factors.
Absolutely. And so my hope is that, and as I've traveled the country, and I've been on panels and on podcasts, et cetera, conferences.
Hmm.
Um, noting the significant gaps in the general public, knowing about the nuanced details about the policymaking process, that also is what drove me to do a brain dump of my own experience to say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, like I get it, I've lived it, and here is part of the inside outside game. Here are ways in which you can actually shape policy because all politics is local,
Yes.
right? And so the extent to which you are able to build relationships with elected officials and uh, other key uh, other key decision makers is critically important, especially as we are literally now in a midterm election year,
Right.
right? And my theme for this year, as I thought about it over the holidays, was this is good for me.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be the year of civic health.
Love it.
So civic health is public health.
Mm-hmm.
So how can I connect? Because we now know that there are connections between the community levels of civic engagements and health outcomes.
Of
And
course.
so those communities that tend to be more engaged
Mm-hmm.
civically,
Mm-hmm.
um, they experience better health outcomes. Why? Because they know more about how the system is set up.
Yes.
They they have been intentional about building relationships with key decision makers, with partnering, with building out coalitions, with making phone calls, sending emails, posting on socials,
Mm-hmm.
like all of these ways in which you can help to educate that candidate who is running for office,
Yeah.
or um, helping to make your case with the official who was already in office. And so, this is a very critical policy window, and the release of my book is very timely because um, last year, um, at least 5 governors, in a bipartisan way, were very explicit in their advocacy for men and boys,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is refreshing. And I'm thankful that there's now a growing awareness of the unique challenges that men and boys have been facing. So the goal is, kind of given this new policy window, how do we lean into it? How do I ensure that black men and boys' voices are heard loud and clear? Because and I say all the time that on one hand, black men are invisible when it comes to their health and well-being on policy
Right.
and research agendas, but they are but at the same time hyper visible
Come on.
when it comes to where they are in the criminal injustice
Yes.
system,
Yes.
right? So yeah.
No, no, I think that's spot on. What do you think is that one specific policy lever that's currently being overlooked? You talked about 5 governors across party lines focusing on men and boys, but what's that decision that could be made on a local level, state level, or perhaps even a federal level that could drastically change the life expectancy of black men?
Listen, that's a so if I were to pick one, and I'll pick one partly because we are in a midterm election year and
Mm-hmm.
we are currently uh, grappling with the question of whether the enhanced A- Affordable Care Act premium tax credits will be extended.
Yes.
Now, the context behind those tax credits, they actually were passed um, five, five, 5 or 6 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and extended to help people afford insurance coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and given the healthcare debates that took place last year,
Mm-hmm.
and given uh, um, the passage of HR1, which is the so-called one big beautiful bill act.
Right, right.
You know, you, I can name it something else, but
Here we
for the
are.
sake of just, for the sake of clarity for the audience, what I'm talking about,
Right.
that bill that was signed on July 4th of 2025,
Yes.
um, it's um, it cut Medicaid by billions of dollars,
Mm-hmm.
and millions of Americans rely on Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and as I have written, um, is if we can expand Medicaid and find ways to finance Medicaid in a way um, that ensures that as many people get some type of access to care as is possible,
Mm-hmm.
then then that is ideal. So um, now that we are in 2026,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm actually I am playing a long game.
Yeah.
Um, I try to be optimistic about the extent to which we'll make some movements on the ACA
Mm-hmm.
this year. Um, Part of the approach is to track what is happening politically,
Mm-hmm.
and what's happening in policy. Um, the midterm cycle, I think, will present as an opportunity to try to um, kind of provide more support or access to people who don't have access to insurance coverage or
Right.
access to care.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece of it is the Medicaid bucket. How can we keep the pressure on elected officials to mitigate the barriers that have been put in place regarding the ACA enhanced premium tax credits.
Mm-hmm.
So it it is what it's going to be. Um, but I'm also advocating for knowing that how do we ensure, kind of back to my earlier point about civic health,
Right.
how can we best educate um, candidates who are running for office about the people's personal stories.
Mm-hmm.
How do we couple that with data, which is part of my approach to my book, is using both uh, uh, what's called a mixed method approach,
Mm-hmm.
meaning using the story of John Henry um, to help people see themselves in that story in some way, shape, or form, but then also following that up with quantitative data,
Yeah.
and then providing policy and practice recommendations that people can share with their colleagues, their friends, uh, staffers on a hill,
Mm-hmm.
or at the state level, as well as local council members. So, it's not an easy question to answer, um, but given where we are right now in this election year, I think really putting pressure on um, ensuring that we could get the tax credits extended would be a solid first step.
Yep.
There are other levers that can be pulled, but
Mm-hmm.
because that's what's currently kind of part of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
then that's where I would focus. But I'll also note that in my book I include a plethora of other ways in which um, people can help to shape policy wherever they are.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm thinking about the ways in which people really have a lot of, you know, tension we talked about the cynicism, just thinking about the ways in which people just assume the sort of change that you and I are talking about can never happen or will never happen. And you argue that health equity specifically depends on political will. So, as
Yeah.
we're looking at these midterms, how do we go about building that robust constituency for Black men's health that is not just dependent upon whoever's in office, but can actually survive changing administrations?
Yeah. So in my book, I came up with another framework, and it's called the cross cycle civic engagement framework.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and the reason why I framed it that way is because, again, we have to play the long game. So yes, it's important to get the small wins and get the lowest hanging fruit, but what is the long game strategy here?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's about, how do I share this information with as many people, um, where it makes sense and it resonates, um, so that we can build out the knowledge base enough to get enough people to get to the table
Mm-hmm.
to to advocate for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's, um, a- as far as staffers on the Hill, for example,
Mm-hmm.
um, only 6% of staffers on the Senate side are black,
Mm-hmm.
um, and on the House side is not that much better.
Right.
So part of the challenge is, how do we get more people that look like us to the table to advocate for our unique needs?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's a matter of partnering with organizations, building coalitions, gathering the data, making phone calls, sending emails, attending town hall meetings and Zoom calls, having your story ready, being comfortable sharing how this policy has impacted you. Um, and I would argue that all of that is rooted in knowledge of self, like
Yeah.
culturally, socially, and spiritually, like really knowing who and whose you are, because um when you have that knowledge, then I argue that you have the agency and you're more confident in finding ways to make your case, so that as you build relationships, um a- across the aisle and across administrations,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to frame your messaging and frame your story in ways that hopefully resonate with the audiences or the people that you're trying to reach. And so it's a sophisticated process,
Mm-hmm.
but as I lay out in the book, it's very doable. And but the challenge is just the knowledge gap. Like, people just don't know what, so, like, most people who haven't worked in Congress or work in policy just don't know
Right.
what happens, like, kind of behind closed doors. I do,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's part of what has driven me to share my knowledge with individuals, to say, hey, there are actually ways in which you can help to move the needle. There are ways in which you can get involved. And so I just happen to have been very intentional about creating a framework that cuts across administrations, in ways that hopefully resonate.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those who are wondering, they're hearing you speak. I want to let them know that you've played an instrumental role in the 21st Century Cures Act.
Hmm. Yeah.
And as you talk about all of this, walk us through some of the biggest misconceptions you've encountered from advocates in terms of how a bill actually becomes law on Capitol Hill.
Right. Yeah. Which gets at the the broader question of education and civic education.
Hmm.
Um, and the ways in which that has been dismantled, and is there's a dearth of civic engagement. I mean, if you run polls, I mean, like the average person, just there are gaps in terms of knowledge about how Congress works, how
Yeah.
what and so yes, it's a matter of how can I share this information in a way that connects the dots for regular people, for people who, like me, who grew up on the South Side of Chicago,
Yeah.
who at times didn't know where the next meal was going to come from,
Come on.
right? And just like all of that. And so, but a high level summary of how a bill gets signed into law, it typically starts with an idea, like,
Hmm.
well, what is the issue, what is the problem, what is the pain point, and then shopping that idea around to your colleagues and to get a sense as to whether this is a timely issue. Um, how much would it cost to actually support this program if it
Right.
gets off the ground? Um, and and so uh, and I use what's called the five P's framework to
Hmm.
help people understand the policy making process. And those five P's are the politics, whether that is the internal office politics or the external broader politics in the space,
Hmm.
the personalities that are involved in drafting the policy. So, who is at the table? Um, the press meaning messaging,
Right.
language. How is that information getting out there? Um, and then a policy, right? So, what is the idea? Um, um, how do we get the the local council member to encourage or to urge the sanitation department to pick up garbage in a timely fashion, right? So like that's the issue.
Hmm.
And so and the fifth P is process. And so it's
Hmm.
all supported by the process. And so for example, using my example is the issue is that the garbage that we have is not being picked up in a timely fashion.
Hmm.
Who do I talk to?
Right.
Where can I meet them at? Um, how can I make my case clear? Um, who else can I bring into this challenge
Hmm.
to help make the case for why we want to urge the sanitation department to do better in picking up our garbage? And so it requires a lot of different levers. It is knowing the problem.
Hmm.
It's also asking the extent to which you have built a relationship with that local council member
Right.
by attending town halls, by attending community events. Um, it's about knowing a policy. Like, so like, what is that? The policy is the policy that the garbage man or person should come at a certain time once a week, or so like what is a policy,
Right.
and then what type of messaging would help to land my pain point in a way that resonates with the council member, and then the process.
Hmm.
Does it mean um, that once I testify in front of the local council members, that this issue will get resolved? If so, how? If not, why not? Right.
Right.
So it's just a very layered thing, and so it's that type of thinking and those tactics and strategies that I include in the book so that people have a framework, uh, have some context around ways in which they can again shape policy to help them not just survive but thrive.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that because what you're laying out is a sense of strategy and intentionality that arguably is sometimes very difficult to maintain if you're in a desperate or very
Exactly.
difficult situation, right?
Right.
So, if I'm hungry, if I'm coming to you, I'm like, okay, I'm starving. You're like, hey, the town hall is next Thursday. I'm like, I
Hmm.
don't got time to next Thursday. I need food right now. So,
Right.
all of that, what you're saying, I think, is what's gonna allow us to really emphasize interdependence because you can't
Hmm.
just do all of that by yourself. You have to be in
Right.
community with people.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, I say all the time, and this is one of my, and this is something that my mentor says all the time, is that in the context of community, you cannot be your best self by yourself,
That's it. That's it.
right? You
Yes.
can't be your best self by
Right.
yourself. It takes community. It takes your tribe. It
Yes.
takes your board of advisors, whoever your people are.
Mm-hmm.
How can you galvanize? How can you organize to encourage, to motivate, to agitate,
Yeah.
right, to
Right.
get things done?
Right.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. One of the services you offer through Enya Strategies is brand storytelling. So
Hmm.
just thinking about this, with a community leader is speaking before an elected official, they're sharing this raw, painful local experience. How do we get a community leader to have the sort of expertise, the dexterity to take that raw, painful local experience and translate it into a way that can become a policy memo that a senator can actually act on rather than just being moved by their powerful story.
Sure. So, in my most recent role on Capitol Hill, I was leveraging my background and experience. I was able to actually train over 170 activists who flew from across the country for a public policy conference
Mhm.
last year. And we know what works. What works is you as the constituent, you as a resident, you as the voter,
Mhm.
as the citizen, getting clear about what your issue or your issues are. Um, and then, because there is a skills building element to this, is learning how to learning how to tell your story,
Right, right,
right? So what is the issue, and then why is it important to you, right? So it's a process of kind of sitting with yourself, sitting with others to get clear on what the issues are,
hmm
um, and then connecting that issue with your why,
hmm
like, and then having the data or the numbers um, to further make your point or
right,
to make your case, and then having an ask. So, like, so for example, um, I literally yesterday
hmm
I met with a staffer that works for Senator Raphael Warnock
okay,
from Georgia
hmm
to discuss a few pieces of legislation. One was called the Dads Matter Act, and the
mm.
other is the Kira Johnson Act. And those bills are centered around ways in which we can support fathers who are better able to support their partners before childbirth, during childbirth, and
Yeah,
after childbirth.
yeah,
So, uh, because I'm on a book tour now,
hmm
I said, okay, um, given the content in my book, how can I share elements of my own personal story as a new father? I have a 2-year-old son. You can see him in the back here,
oh, for
right?
sure,
um, how can I share my story with this staffer,
yeah,
and then offer myself as a resource to help support Senator Warnock and his advocacy for maternal child health,
Yes.
and fatherhood, right?
Yeah.
I had to sit with or select some aspect of my experience. And
Hmm.
so what I selected was the fact that, um, as I was as I was accompanying my wife to the different doctor's appointments, uh, before she gave birth, and then during her birthing period, and then afterwards, I would find that in the course of the encounter, while she is, yes, getting the attention that she needed,
Hmm.
I would feel invisible. I was not engaged. I wasn't
Yeah.
asked about anything. Like I was not, I didn't feel part of the overall conversation.
Right. Right. Right.
And that was a pattern that I saw in different settings.
Hmm.
So I'm like, I like what's happening. I'm like, this doesn't feel right. And
Yeah.
then given my experience as a medical student, I'm like, okay, what else is kind of what else might be going on here?
Hmm.
And and so that experience helped shape and fashion my fatherhood advocacy voice
Yeah.
because, especially as a black male, knowing what we know about the ways in which the system uh, doesn't respect us as black and brown people,
Right.
as black men, like there's a lot behind it.
For sure.
um, and so I had to, I chose that as an example to make my case for my interest in supporting Senator Warnock's work in the context of some of the narrative or the content that I had in my book.
Hmm.
Um, and because I was able to share part of my story with the staffer, I could tell that it resonated with her, and like she was able to actually, it you know uh, it it made it more clear as to why it was important for her to take the notes that she was taking back to her boss to ensure that there's actually someone here who gets it,
Yeah.
who also, yes, happens to be one of Raphael Warnock's fraternity brothers.
Hmm.
But then also can help to to shape policy.
Yeah.
And then my ask was, all right, given all of that, how can I be most helpful, or can you make sure that your boss gets this book? So
Yeah.
as one ask. Two is, I'm happy. Can I serve as a moderator or a panelist for any upcoming briefings or hearings or forums or events
Hmm.
that your boss is hosting, so that I can feel like I am an active part of this process to advocate for Black men and boys or for others? Because I found that most men, it seems,
Yeah.
because I'm part of other different men's groups,
Right.
also have that experience of not feeling seen or not feeling engaged if they are looking to be present and engaged with their partner.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, so again, it's like, what is the issue? Um, why is it important? Where is the data to support it? And then what is your ask? Are you asking that that's uh, uh, that elected official to sign on to a bill, to allocate funding,
Hmm.
to help to put this program in place, right? So it's those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Now, I love what you're saying because I think the ways in which I've seen men who have tragically lost their wives and their partners
Hmm.
in childbirth, become these maternal health advocates, and just the irony of men often can be like ignored in parenting or just have like extremely low bars or low thresholds of what a successful black father looks like.
Right.
I think being able to advocate for issues like this is like extremely timely. Um,
Hmm.
just switching gears a bit and thinking about your work with AI integration for policy impact. I'm thinking about the ways in which healthcare definitely is being impacted by AI, particularly through technology. I'm
Hmm.
just curious to know what can we do to ensure that the healthcare technology of the future or of now, really, because the way AI is being integrated currently, how do we make sure that it's not just automating bias? You know, it's not taking
Yeah.
on the same sort of I worldviews that have held us captive for far too long.
Yeah, and and I devote several sections of my book to the role of AI in terms of health policy and health equity. Um, so there's an adage that says garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah.
So and so um, again, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. If we are not there to to help design models, to help shape what goes into these models, if we're not at the table to advocate for or to call out the need to find ways to mitigate bias, then we're going to continue to have these issues. And so, um, that there's, uh, I think that part of it is going to take a mindset shift,
Mm-hmm.
especially for those of us who historically have not had the opportunity to have our voices heard
Yeah.
in meaningful ways.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I will say that Gen AI, or AI writ large,
Mm-hmm.
is I would argue that it is, or it has the potential to be an equalizer, in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that the ways in which it's used, um, if we are smart about it, and if you have an interest, for example, in becoming an entrepreneur, or other interests, then finding ways to leverage the technology, I think, is key. Now, um, I always try to kind of couple that with, for us as Black and brown people, to be willing to call out the need to address bias
Mm-hmm.
in the data, like what and we like, I wish we had more time, but
Mm-hmm.
I would, I can get into um the 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 different ways in which AI both helps us in the healthcare ecosystem, but also can be very harmful. And so, um, you know, I- I'll give an example of a harm. So the during COVID, uh, one piece of equipment that became much more known was called the pulse oximeter. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for those that are not familiar with the pulse oximeter, that uh, when you go to the doctor, as part of their evaluation, they will put like this little kind of gray or white thing on your index finger.
Mm-hmm.
That's to assess levels of oxygen in your blood.
Right.
Um, Now, what we found during COVID, well, so COVID actually highlighted uh, the issues with the ways in which the pulse oximeter was reading oxygen levels, especially for darker skinned patients. We found that the levels, so um, because of the way in which the pulse oximeter was calibrated, it doesn't take into account the amount of melanin in the skin of
Yeah.
patients. And
Right.
so if you had darker skin, that would throw off the pulse oximeter, and it would give a reading that would say that the patient was okay when that patient actually wasn't.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
so because of that discrepancy, Black and brown patients were more likely to be sent home
Yeah.
during COVID, because of that one particular reading. Yes, there were other
Mm-hmm.
issues, as well, but just
Mm-hmm.
to give that as an example of the ways in which instruments, you know, and algorithms
Right.
can be shaped by the people who actually create them. Who,
Mm-hmm.
in this case, I would argue they probably didn't look like us,
Yeah, I'd
right?
imagine.
So yeah, so there's a lot behind that, but you know, I am for using AI
Mm-hmm.
in a responsible way.
Sure.
I think that it will be important to ensure that there are guardrails in place to control for bias, and discrimination. I can bring up housing discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
cases with algorithms. There's a plethora of algorithmic bias cases
Yeah,
that we know that are very problematic and have to be addressed.
no doubt about it. You're a proponent of finding your tribe, and with that in mind, what piece of advice would you give to young Black professionals who are entering the public health field currently?
Yeah, get clear on your value add.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Being clear on who and whose you are
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is critically important. Um, Knowing your worth, knowing that you are enough, um, knowing that again you can't be your best self by yourself. It takes people that you're willing to work with and or that you trust,
Yeah.
that can give you helpful feedback and can serve as mentors or sponsors for you,
Mm-hmm.
those that can bring your name up in the room when you're not there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
it's being flexible, being nimble, being open to change, having a growth mindset, being willing to network and build meaningful relationships, being clear again on who and whose you are, um, building out the resilience piece, and and persistence, and being rooted in your faith. If you are a person of faith,
Mm-hmm.
that is critically important. And so that, amongst other things, are what I would share with your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. If your 4-year policy agenda were fully adopted tomorrow, breaking news, what would a typical day look like for a Black man in America 4 years from now in 2030?
That every black man in America is thriving and
Mm,
has the tools, has the resources, is equipped with ensuring that when they get to the decision making table, that they do not forget why they are there.
mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, that is part of what drives me is the content in this book will help you get clear on your purpose and also finding ways in which you can engage in the system, but also be open to building out your own system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I my hope my my goal is to, like, if we can ensure that um, black men have the skills, the knowledge, the support, the resources to thrive. I think that is part of what helps to lay the groundwork for this book in the context of ensuring that um, black men are able to um, be those pillars of the community, to thrive, and to leave legacies that will impact generations.
No, I love that. I absolutely love that. That is incredible, brother. The work you're doing is not only inspiring; it is necessary. Where
Thank
can
you.
people find your books and follow your work? And your strategies, your website, Substack, all that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So You can find my books on my website, enyastrategies.com. I also have a blog on Substack. If you Google me, you'll find me, out there on my socials. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Um, I also have a YouTube page. So if you Google my name, you'll be able to find me somewhere. And so I would look forward to help you all uh, walk in purpose. Those that want to reach out, I hope that my content is timely, that it is relevant
Hmm.
and meaningful, and helps to change your life for the better.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, definitely check out all of Dr. Enya's work. We'll post some of the links, if not all of those links that he mentioned, on the episode description. But as always, just want to thank you all so much for being here. 2025 was a great year for this podcast, and excited to see where 2026 will go. As always, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch us on YouTube. Go to BaddestChaplain.com, and also, we're live streaming this right now on YouTube and on LinkedIn and even Twitch. I'm trying to keep up with the youth on Twitch. So if you want to follow us there, you can do the same at Baddest Chaplain at all those platforms. But until next time, be blessed, take care, and